So here's what we're doing with the snare drum. Let's actually listen to this in solo. So just in one move here, we're basically bringing out a bunch of the sort of sizzle of the snare drum using this node here, this EQ node. Let's take a listen to this in solo. That sort of 10k area, bringing out a little bit of sizzle. Okay, the next thing we're going to listen to is what the virtual mix track is doing for the snare top mic. And we're listening with the drum bus. Usually you would listen to it in context with everything, the bass guitar and the guitar and the lead vocal. But here we're not doing that because I do want to just make it a little bit easier for people to hear the effect that it's having. But just keep in mind, when you're mixing, you would do this in the context of the entire track. You want to hear all the information. Obviously, in this instance, as I mentioned earlier, we have got a few things muted, which we've done purposefully. But usually you would listen with the whole context. So this is in bypass. Let's take a listen to what the VCC is doing. Actually sounds like it gets a little bit more snappier, the snare drum. Let's listen to that in solo just to really try and take stock of what that's doing. So in bypass. Yeah, the saturation's definitely added a little bit more point to the snare there. Next we've got the New York. Let's bring in... In fact, we will listen to this in solo and we'll bring back in the entire drum track. That's just fattening it up a little bit more. And next we have the FG stress. Let's listen to this in solo. That's a good bit of compression we've got there. Not loads, but you can really hear the effect. Hear that with the rest of the drum track. So this has quite a nice sound to it. Essentially, it's quite a slow attack, so it's letting through that initial transient, but because we've compressed it a fair bit, it's pushing down on that sustain part. And then just as the sustain is really tailing off, the compression is easing off, so we're getting a little bit more sustain from the snare drum as well. So I'll demonstrate that now. So right now we have it set to 5.6. So if I set this to 0, which would make the release very, very quick. It's actually too quick to hear that sort of release of the compressor. As we slow this down, we start to work with the actual transients of the snare drum, and that will accentuate the sustain sound of the snare drum, basically. So the release here is really important. In terms of the attack, we've got that coming in as slow as possible. You can hear how that really smacks the snare drum on the head there. That sounds a lot more snappier, a lot more transient. Slow isn't always the best setting. Sometimes going somewhere in between can sound quite nice. But for this instance, I felt like a slow attack was the best way to go. We're using a 3:1 ratio, so quite a subtle ratio, not going too overboard. Obviously, the higher ratio you use, the more aggressive the compressor's going to sound. And we're not using any of the detector switches or the audio effect switches, none of the high pass or the distortions. Okay, so we're going for more of a clean model, but you should note that with the FG Stress, even if you haven't got these on, it's still adding harmonics to it. You can actually check this. I'm not going to bother doing it because it's outside of the scope of the video. But yeah, it does add its own harmonics, just so you are aware. Right, so this next one that we're adding is the Neutron Transient Shaper, and it's a multi-band transient shaper, and we're working with this area here. All right, let me just take the drum bus out for now. Oh right, we've got a bypass, that's why we can't hear it. So right there, that's sort of the low-end fundamental of the snare we're focusing on. And this area is essentially the rest of the signal. So that's like the low mid range all the way through to the treble frequencies. So let's just bypass this for now, and we'll bring it back in and try and take stock of what this has actually done to the snare drum. So it sounds more weighty. So we're getting a little bit more of that thump coming through. Let's listen to that in the context of the entire drum track again. Yeah, you can hear that sort of low-end fundamental just punching out a little bit more on the drum bus. And it sounds thin now that we're bypassed. Yeah. Okay, let's move on to the snare bottom mic now. Let's just take a listen to what this is doing. Okay, so as you can see here, we're basically high passed all the way up. So we're taking out this fundamental completely. Let's take a listen to what this EQ sounds like. And we've also added some focus to this 4.1 kilohertz node. Quite a wide EQ node that we're using here. Right, so the reason we've done that is because we're working in tandem with the snare top, and I'm thinking in terms of roles. So, you know, the snare top is going to add our punch and our transient detail, the way it sort of like pokes out in the mix. But the snare bottom is more going to be used as a tool for adding a sustained sound. So obviously the bottom of a snare drum, you've got that nice sort of metal thing. I don't actually know what it's called. The little metal thing where as you hit it, it vibrates against the bottom of the snare and it makes a nice sizzly sound. So what I want to do, I want to just isolate that sizzly sound, and I can then use this fader to bring it in when I need more snare sustain and take it away when I don't want as much snare sustain. So that's kind of what I'm doing with the EQ, just focusing in on that part of the sound. Now, next thing we have on the snare bottom. Okay, we've saturated it. And I know why I've done that. Basically, we are distorting that sizzly part of the snare sound so that it is very consistent, and it's always going to be sort of like a similar level. And that way, when we bring it up into the mix, it's going to give us a very consistent sound right the way through, regardless of how hard the snare drum's hitting. So what we've done is we've added the trimmer here, 15 decibels on the way in, 15 decibels on the way out, and we've got 2 saturators. We've got the virtual channel using the Brit 4KE, and on the London we are, as you can see, really pushing this quite hard with 9 on the way in. So just demonstrate this. Let's listen to this completely in solo. Right, here it is in solo. Currently in bypass. So as you can hear, the distortion is just making it a much more fuller sound, and it's just going to be a lot more consistent when we bring that into the mix. So let's actually listen to this in full context. And we'll bring this in and out. I say full context, I mean with the rest of the drums in, basically. So you can hear that sustain just starting to come through a little bit more now. Yeah, just coming through a bit more. Let's isolate both these snares and take them out. So you can hear a lot more point coming through now, a little bit more of that attack of the snare drum is coming through. Also, we get a nice sustain from this snare bottom as well. Right, okay, next thing we want to look at is the hi-hat and ride. So let's show you what we're going to start with and what we're going to end up with. This is in bypass. So you can hear we're going for a lo-fi sort of hi-hat sound, essentially. Let's actually look at what we're doing here. Bring this in with the whole drum bus now. The first thing we're doing is a sort of a sort of band pass. And here's what this sounds like. So you can hear the hi-hat sounds very brittle right now on the left side. So it's just taking away a little bit of that sibilance using this low pass. And we're also focusing the sound using the high pass, because down here, what have we got? We've got essentially noise, low frequency noise. So we don't really need that. So we're just high passing it out and focusing on the part of the hi-hat sound that we do want. Now, the next thing we are using is a compressor. Let's see how we're using this. So we're using the compressor a little bit like a transient shaper here. We're letting the initial transients through so that we get that little bit of hi-hat poking its head out above the rest of the drum bus. But then as soon as it goes above that threshold, we're pulling it back. Now we're using a medium slow release, so we're letting it come back nice and subtly as we listen here. So we never let it quite get right the way back to the 0 gain reduction. But overall, I think this is just giving us a lot more consistency as well. You can see how much it was compressing on the verses there. It was compressing about 5 dB. So we're also getting some more consistency. So the hi-hat's not going too loud or too quiet. We're getting a a nice amount of hi-hats in our drum bus at all times. The next thing we go into is a plugin called Murder Melodies, which is from Slate Digital. And the only thing we're using here is this little fire icon here, which is what's going to give us our lower fi sound. And I'll actually solo just a hi-hat just to demonstrate what this actually sounds like. So this is in bypass. So in bypass, you can hear that sibilance coming through. And you can hear as soon as we engage the plugin, it's a much warmer sound, a lot less sibilance. Now, sibilance isn't bad. It's not a bad thing. You can always have nice, sibilance hi-hat or cymbals. But for this track, I just wanted it to be a nice warm hi-hat so that we could bring that in and get good definition on the hi-hat without a lot of high frequencies hitting our ears, essentially. So here's what that sounds like, all in bypass, and I'll bring it in with the rest of the drum bus. So you can hear the sibilance coming through. If I just skip to the verse, listen how loud the hi-hat goes in the verse. You can hear it goes louder there, so we need the compressor for that. So we'll listen with all the processing on now. So a much warmer, more defined sound, not as sibilant, so it's not hitting our ears as much. It kind of fits in nice with the drum bus. Now you can hear the compressor coming in and pulling back the hi-hat, making sure it gives us a nice even level into the drum bus. Right, okay, next thing we want to listen to is the room mic. So let's listen to the room mic in solo right now. Just for now, I'll make this louder for you because it's quite quiet at the moment. And this is what we've done to it. You can see we've actually used just a very subtle amount of dynamic EQ just to keep the top end quite, controlled, so that when the crashes come in, the hi-hats come in, the rides come in, particularly very loudly. Just going to pull them back a little bit and make sure that we're not getting too sibilant. So very, very simple there on the room microphone. Let's just listen to that in the context of the whole drum bus. I'll bring the rooms down now. You can hear it coming there particularly. So as that crash comes in, you can hear the top end of the crashes just getting sucked out a little bit. Just waiting for another crash to come in. Yeah. So that's essentially what this is doing. It's just helping us keep the top end of the drum bus nice and even. We don't want the sibilance to come out too much or too little. So I feel like this processing altogether gives us a nice balance. Okay, let's listen to everything overall and we will bypass it and just basically show what we've done. So this is with everything in. Straight away you hear that boxiness coming. Now let's listen in context of the entire track. Well, our simplified track, I should say. doesn't sound too bad right now. Let's bring in our process trains.
You do have a way with me. You and I have a love breakable by anything, everlasting throughout time. You and I will see the world.
Yep. So overall, yep, less boxiness, a lot more definition and intensity on the drum bus, which is what we want. And that's how we process the drums on I'm There For You. Thanks very much for watching. I'll catch you next time.